Welcome back to our live coverage from PDAC, the annual convention of the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada. There are some 30,000 people here at the conference this year, but when you look around, one thing you notice is out of those 30,000 people, not very many women, and that is our focus today, women in mining, or the lack of. And actually StatsCan puts the number at just over 14% of the industry, and most of the women working in the industry are actually working in jobs like in the cookhouse. But today we're going to talk about other things, and we're going to start with Jean Lucas. She is the president of Women in Mining in Canada and executive vice president business development at Eco Waste Solutions. Great to have you with us, Jean.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming in. So that number that I quoted in the intro, 14%, it's the lowest of any of the major industry groups in the country.
Right, and it might surprise you that it's even lower than other resource-based industries, including forestry and fishery. So it's quite low, and even much lower than oil and gas, for example, which is at around 20%, so quite a bit lower than that.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think mining is lower than those other resource industries?
Well, I know that oil and gas has made some efforts in the recent years in terms of focusing on attracting more women, putting more women in leadership positions so that women are more visible in the industry, which also helps gain attraction to the industry. So I think it's probably something to do more with the programs that they're doing, but they are definitely doing a better job of attracting talent, female talent.
And so what about the route to the executive suite specifically? I mean, that is extremely challenging in any industry for women, but it must be even worse in mining.
Absolutely. We do see that it's quite a slow path to leadership roles.
So even in the roles that would get you to the executive suite ultimately, like the vice presidential positions, executive VP positions, and so forth?
Right. Although there's quite a strong representation of women, you mentioned women in the culinary services, but there's actually a very high representation of women in administrative and corporate services positions. In fact, over 60% of those positions are filled by women in the mining industry. Yet, strangely, there's only about 44% representation of them in management roles in that same segment.
So they get stuck in those admin positions?
Right. They're not advancing at the same rate they should be.
So what about in schools, in engineering schools, geology schools, and so forth?
Right. We're seeing now about 50% of graduates being female.
From which kinds of schools?
From both of those types of schools. And engineering is a good example because many other industries, again, are attracting those types of people away into other sectors, oil and gas being an excellent example. And that's a very key issue for the mining industry because we need to attract the best talent. And if we're losing them to other industries, we need to do something about that.
A lot of people get to the top of the mining world because they have an expertise in finance.
Right.
So what about women in finance as a route to the executive suite in mining?
Right, that's a very important one, absolutely. And we still do see that there are large numbers of women in those roles and in those areas in the company, but they are not rising to the top at the same rate.
Do you have to be one of the boys?
There's no doubt that those informal networks are very key, particularly in the boardroom. Often when it comes to choosing other directors, the board will look at their peers and look at people in their closest circle, and it typically is men. And women don't often have access or even be aware of many of those informal networks that are required.
We often hear that, particularly from Catalyst, which is coming out with its report on women on boards this week, that when you have a more diverse board, a more diverse company, your returns are better. That argument gets made over and over and over again.
Absolutely.
Why do you think there's resistance in the industry if that argument is consistently made?
Right. Well, there's definitely a very strong body of evidence, and we do think that, in general, the mining industry may have some preconceived notions. There are certain frames of reference that are being worked with. We think it's predominantly because of the fact that it is a male-dominated industry. And again, sometimes these assumptions are on an unconscious level. Sometimes, and what we've seen, Women in Mining Canada in 2010, we did a research report where we looked at the representation of women. It was one of the biggest gender research reports to date. And what we discovered was that men often, or male counterparts, were actually having some inaccurate negative perceptions. Everything from women's physical abilities, their strength, right, their physical strength, their leadership skills, their willingness and availability to travel, for example. And these
like out to the woods and remote locations
right,
where you got to go for mining.
or international assignments. And there's a strong correlation in mining to taking those types of assignments and actually progressing in your career. So if women are being passed over, sometimes again unconsciously by their superiors, because they'll assume that they won't want to take those assignments, then that can have a really severe impact on their career.
I'll ask you a blunt question. Is it a sexist industry?
Well, it's certainly a male-dominated industry, and
is that what you were getting at before? The negative assumptions,
right? And I think that gender awareness type of training would be helpful in the industry. There's no doubt that in many cases it's always been a boys' network, so it's hard to adjust to these new things and think about new faces that weren't normally associated with leadership positions in mining. And that includes all forms of diversity, not just women.
What about family issues and personal sacrifices that women would have to make in order to travel and go to these remote locations if they want to raise kids?
Right. Well, that's definitely very true, but those are the same kind of issues for men. Men nowadays want more and more participation in the family. They want to participate at home, and they want to be at home too. So if the mining industry looked at creative ways of making that better for families in general, it would have a positive impact on the entire industry, men too, because that also could be preventing men entering the industry for the same reasons.
And the industry needs workers long term, doesn't it?
Absolutely. There's MIR, the Mining Industry Human Resource Council of Canada, actually estimates the need for workers at about 92,000 people over the next decade. That's a huge number, and we're not able to fill that. We're only estimating we can get about 10,000 with graduates and a little bit of immigration. We need to look at the other 50% of the population to fill some of those jobs.
So you're leaving a lot of brain power behind if you don't...
Right, absolutely. We need to engage women and take advantage of what they can bring to the table.
All right, well, we have to leave it there. Great to have you with us, Jean.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Time.
That's Jean Lucas. She's president of Women in Mining in Canada. Up next, 2 women involved in sheer diamonds. We'll talk about that, the women in mining issue, and what they are doing at that company right after this.